You are not immune to propaganda. Now, that's a scary thought, isn't it? Well, it probably isn't very scary if you don't actually know what propaganda is in the first place. Propaganda is essentially biased or misleading information used to promote a particular point of view, often political in nature, and often uses loaded words to elicit an emotional response rather than a rational one. Simply speaking, propaganda is mind control without all the fancy sci-fi bits. If you get propaganda right, your ideology can survive, even in the face of cold, hard facts. The Soviet Union would have ceased to exist much earlier if not for propaganda. In fact, some countries today are still resisting revolution with propaganda of their own. North Korea. So to understand why propaganda works so well, I think it is important to visit the origins of propaganda first. Propaganda may seem like a modern idea, but that is only because the term is a modern one. Its origins actually lie in the rational-minded direct democracy of the ancient Greek city-state of Athens. Its citizens were conscious and well-informed of the problems and interests of their beloved city-state, and so propaganda and counter-propaganda were necessary to influence the public to think a certain way, so that decisions could be made. Because in a direct democracy, we kind of needed a majority opinion to do anything. The Athenians used plays, speeches, art, games, and even religious festivals to make the public think a certain way. This ancient Greek amphora, this vase thing, depicts an epic victory designed to romanticize war. Even ancient Greek myths were, at their core, propaganda, designed to inspire people and make them think that something greater exists out there. Ever since then, propaganda has been present in almost all societies. The concept of feudalism could not exist without religion, and the Roman Catholic Church was very good at using religion as a form of propaganda. As long as the serfs believed that they were suffering for some greater cause, they were content, or at least forced to be content. Propaganda is always enhanced by the threat of violence. Propaganda has also played a major role in about every revolution you can think of, including the American, French, and Bolshevik revolutions, where flyers and other such mediums were used to spread ideas like wildfire, and those ideas were then armed with guns against the ruling monarchs. Speaking of the Bolshevik Revolution, let's fast forward to World War I, where new technologies such as newspapers and the radio are being used to spread information more quickly than ever before. And with the rise of new communist and fascist ideologies, these new technologies were being used to create propaganda that was more widespread and effective than ever before. Actually, let's slow down a bit here. Now, they say that hindsight is 20/20. In situations like these, we now definitely see the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany as bad ideas. And I don't want to say that they weren't bad ideas, because they were pretty terrible ideas, but I do want to say that the American public's opinion of these countries is heavily affected by propaganda. Just for reference, did you know that 10 million Ukrainians were killed in a man-made Soviet famine called the Holodomor in 1932? I was born there. Okay, so how many of you know what the Holocaust is? Raise your hands. Now, how many of you know what the Great Leap Forward is? How many of you knew that 25% of Cambodia's population was killed by the policies of the Khmer Rouge? And a scary 60% of these deaths were due to executions. Now, obviously we know a lot more about the crimes of Nazi Germany because we were in a war with Nazi Germany. But during World War II, American cartoons depicted Hitler and the Nazi Party as a bunch of doomed fools. And Imperial Japan was depicted as fanatic and without mercy. Even Japanese Americans are seen as ready to sabotage the US war effort at the blow of a whistle. During World War II, propaganda made World War II seem like the battle of good against bad, and there's no gray area. Now we have the ability to look at both sides of the situation, but back then that's just how it was. However, this sentiment had several ill effects, as the cruel internment of Japanese Americans likely would not have been supported by the general public if the propaganda engine didn't make many otherwise rational people think that all Japanese were out to get us. Ever since then, propaganda has played an increasingly large role in politics and society at large. The US government spent $3.5 trillion on the war on drugs, and many people who are born in the 90s or 80s can distinctly remember the message that drugs are bad being hammered into their brains. During 9/11, the public was scared and confused, and the US government used that confusion to direct that confusion from confusion to anger, which is then utilized in the Iraq War, which is coincidentally very beneficial for certain members of the US government, but that's a story for another day. Propaganda can also be used to influence elections, with some of the more modern examples being bots on social media that spread fake news about candidates or issues. But why do people believe propaganda and fake news? Looking back at old propaganda today, it is easy to see how biased and skewed it is, and while modern propaganda may be slightly more subtle, all of it still works on the same basic principle. You are much more likely to believe in something that you agree with than to believe something that you disagree with. This is called confirmation bias, and it is something that is definitely an issue nowadays with the rise of fake news and shock media. Why fact check something that you believe in? This kind of attitude has the power to influence elections and therefore the world around us heavily. Confirmation bias is at the core of lots of propaganda, whether it's a flyer from World War I telling us that we're winning the war, or a promotional video from the US Army that plays heroic music as a pilot poses next to a fighter jet. So, in short, propaganda is something that is here to stay, but it is still something that we can fight back against. You are not immune to propaganda, especially if it's propaganda that you agree with, but I believe that whenever you take a stance on something, it is necessary to stop, think, and ask yourself, where did I get my opinions from? Having the willpower to answer a question like that honestly is half the battle. If you got set opinions from the internet, there are many websites such as Snopes and FactCheck that you can use to make sure that your opinions are built off of solid foundations with facts and logic and reasoning behind them. Another thing that you can do to help make yourself more resistant to propaganda is to look at both sides of the story. Ask yourself, where did they get their opinions from? Don't immediately assume that the other side is just mindless drones. Look at this problem from their side of the story. Don't think that people are stupid just because they're on the other side. And finally, spread the word to people you know. Having an enlightened populace is the first real step to a better society. Thank you.